Hello, today we're making a fun little diorama with a troll, so stick around. I have always had an affinity for trolls. Maybe it's because I pretty much grew up in the middle of a forest in the northern parts of Sweden, and those forests are what you would call conducive for imagining trolls. I don't know, perhaps that's why I felt the urge to make this diorama today. Or is it just because trolls are cool? I don't know, perhaps. The basic idea is to make a diorama of a forest scenery where the head and hands of a troll is poking up behind some rocks. The troll will be looking down at the bottom of the diorama where a mysterious man will be standing, looking all casual and stuff. More on the mysterious man later, but first let's focus on the troll. As you can see, I started by sculpting the head first and gave the troll a really big bulbous nose. Then I poked some holes in the eye sockets and added some small clay balls. Since only half of the face would be visible in the diorama, it was really important that the eyes would convey the feeling that I was after. I wanted the troll to look a bit tired and confused, like it had just woke up. When the eyes were done, then I took my homemade texture poker and poked some rough texture across the entire head, because I wanted the troll to have a stone-like quality to the skin. I cut a small clay ball in half and started to reshape the pieces that eventually would become the ears on our troll. And just like with the nose, I made sure to make the ears really big. It's starting to sound like I'm trying to sculpt my own face. I like the idea of trolls having braided hair, so I took 3 small clay ropes and I started to braid them to the best of my ability. And when the hair were braided, then I attached it to the head. I decided to hang the hair on the side of the head instead of letting it hang backwards, because otherwise it wouldn't be all that visible in the end. Then the head was done and it was time to make some hands. As previously mentioned, not only will the troll's head be poking out from behind some rocks, but also its hands. Usually I'm not a big fan of sculpting hands, but since these hands will be flat and quite big compared to others I've made, it will be much easier to sculpt the amount of details that I want to have. 3, 2, 1, handshake. Once I was completely positive that I was actually making a hand, then I proceeded to focus on finer details as well as banging my head on the camera. As a final thing, I poked some fingernails into existence. But of course, hands usually come in pairs, so I made one more in a similar fashion as the first one off camera, and then the troll were done. Excellent, yes. Then it was time to make our mysterious little human. So I twirled some aluminum wires to make an armature. The idea was that the human would be a watcher of the forest of some sort, kind of like a forest police or something like that. But when the armature were done, I realized that I'd made a little figure skater. Sculpting humans this small isn't something that I'm all that used to, so I wasn't entirely sure how it would turn out. But I started like I usually do, just adding a layer of clay before moving on to any details. I had some ideas of what I wanted the character to look like before I started to sculpt, but I kind of liked the feeling of not planning every last little detail and just going with the flow sometimes. And that's pretty much what I did with this little dude. I wanted him to have a lighter armor of some sort and also a cloak, but that was pretty much the extent of my planning. If you liked the video so far, please consider giving it a thumbs up. I'm really thankful for all the support that I get. Thank you so much. Boop. Sculpting faces this small is kind of a hit or miss for me, so I kinda just let the clay take me where it wants to go instead of the other way around. In the end, the face turned out looking like a bearded, grumpy old man with a scar on his face. But I think it looks alright, considering that my first attempt were heading in this direction. Mother of God! I decided to make my life a bit more easy, so instead of sculpting tiny hair, I just made a hood and covered up his head. And lastly, before the sculpting was done, I gave him a spear as well as a shield that I had made off camera. Then our little watcher man was complete and it was time to make a base. The idea is to make a forest scenery with a sloping rock wall that will be covered in some greenery. At the bottom of the slope our little spearman will be standing, looking out into the distance, unaware that he is being watched by a sleepy and slightly confused troll. I glued together some XPS foam to look like a poorly constructed pyramid before starting to remove pieces in an orderly fashion to make the foam look less like foam and more like rock. This is perhaps one of my favorite things to do, just go to town with my plier and nibble away chunks of foam all over the place and seeing how a rocky slope appears out of nowhere. And I'm really excited about the way it turned out. Then I was done with the base for now and it was time to make a tree. Up till now I'd never crafted a tree before, so this was a special occasion, no doubt. And when the aluminum armature were done, then I started to add some clay. I didn't know exactly what kind of tree I was making, but I knew I wanted it to look like it had seen better days. You know, just a really old and really dead tree. And once I'd given it some texture, then I attached some smaller branches here and there. And I gotta be honest, it doesn't really look all that great right now, but with a little paint on it, I'm sure that it will look just fine. Well, then we were done sculpting and crafting and stuff, and it was time to paint. Despite what your preference in movies or books are, rocks are not just 50 shades of grey. So I started out with a brown base coat, because I think that gives a way more natural look. Before I could proceed with painting any highlights on the brown base coat, I had to make sure that it was dry first. And as I was waiting for that to happen, I painted all of the other parts of the base black. I dry brushed the rocks in many different layers and colors, because my goal was to make them look as realistic as possible, and rocks tend to have a large amount of color variation. No two rocks really look the same. So after a layer of light brown, I proceeded with a lighter grey, followed by some greens and some other colors as well. Then the base was painted and it was time to move on to the troll. The head of the troll got painted with a black-blue base coat across the entire thing. Then I added some layers of highlight using a quite muted blue-grey, and I made sure that the transitions between the layers were looking smooth enough that no hard lines between the colors were visible. I gave the troll some blue eyes before moving on to glazing in some reds. That way the face would look a bit more warm and a bit more alive. Then the face were done and it was time to paint the hands. The hands got painted in a similar fashion, a dark to light blue gradient across the entire thing, while the fingernails were painted brown, followed by some lighter highlights to make them look really worn. Then I moved on to paint our tiny human. I started by giving him a black base coat from top to bottom. Then I painted his cloak with a really nice wine red color, and when that layer had dried, then I stippled on some highlights. I painted the armor dark green, followed by some edge highlight on all the individual rhombuses. Then the upper part of his clothing, whatever that part is called, got painted orange before moving on to the face, which I painted in a couple of different layers. All the metallic parts got painted with a metallic paint, then I added some wash to make it look a bit more aged. Then it was done and we were on to paint the tree. I started by applying a mega thick brown base coat, and in the process of doing so, of course, I managed to break off 2 small branches. One more time, 2. But that's cool, I didn't need those branches anyways. Then I dry brushed on some grey as well as some green. The final layer of dry brushing was an off-white that I applied in small amounts, very gently. Whoa. Lastly, I glazed the entire thing in a watered-down brown color to tie all the other colors together. Then the tree were done, and considering how it looked before, I'm quite happy with the results. As you might have guessed, the base wasn't complete when I was done painting it. Now we still need to add some greenery to this scenery. After a healthy amount of PVA glue were added, then I sprinkled on some dirt that I found out in nature across the entire base. And after that, I glued down the tree in place. A couple of grass tufts were attached on the bottom of the base, along the edge of some rocks. Then a dark green flock were added here and there, pretty much on the entire base. I used it to cover up the exposed roots of the tree, as well as every flat surface that didn't have much else going on. Finally, I sprinkled on some brown leaves here and there, and then the base was pretty much done. The only thing that was left to do was to add some watered down PVA glue to seal all the greenery in place. I'm gonna show you the final results in just 1 second, but before that, I just wanna say thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already, if you don't want to miss any other video that I'm gonna release. Thank you so much for sticking around. Goodbye!